You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Hallie Ephron.
Thank you for tuning into Author Stories. We have a fantastic show for you today. Be sure to go to hankgarner.com where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite podcasting platform. You can find links to it there at hankgarner.com. I'd like to tell you about some sponsors before we get started today. The Clockwork Detective, Constable of Aquiline, Book 1 by R.A. McCandless. Aubrey Hartman left the Imperial battlefields with a pocket full of medals, a fearsome reputation, and a clockwork leg. The Imperium diverts her trip home to investigate the murder of a young druid in a strange town. She is ordered to not only find the killer, but prevent a full-scale war with the dreaded Fae. Meanwhile, the arrival of a sinister secret policeman threatens to dig up Aubrey's own secrets, ones that could ruin her career. It soon becomes clear that Aubrey has powerful enemies with plans to stop her before she gets started. Determined to solve the mystery, Aubrey must survive centaurs, thugs, and a monster of pure destruction. You need to check out this exciting new series from R.A. McCandless, Steampunk Meets Urban Fantasy, and The Clockwork Detective. The Zombie Road Omnibus, The Roadkill Collection by David Simpson. Buckle up, it's gonna get bloody. Get the Zombie Road box set featuring the first 3 books in the award-winning Zombie Road series for over 1,100 pages of action-packed, suspense-filled, post-apocalyptic fiction. Includes Convoy of Carnage, Bloodbath on the Blacktop, Rage on the Rails. If you're looking for apocalyptic thrill ride filled with everyday people, heroes, villains, and a dog named Bob, then look no further. Full of thought-provoking ideas that cover uncharted territory in post-apocalyptic fiction, this series will keep you rooting for the good guys, despising the bad, and turning the pages until the very end. The Zombie Road Omnibus, The Roadkill Collection by David Simpson. Homefront, an Expeditionary Force audio drama special from Craig Allenson. A full cast performance of a thrilling new episode in the New York Times best-selling Expeditionary Force series. After the latest mission of the Starship Flying Dutchman, Earth is safe, not just for a year, but for hundreds of years. The ship's weary crew wonders what they will do with their lives in the peacetime, but the enemy has other plans, and there's danger on the home front. Starring Zachary Quinto, R.C. Bray, Kate Mulgrew, Robert Picardo, and everyone's favorite AI, Skippy the Magnificent, alongside a full cast. Includes plenty of pew 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 original sound composition and maybe some singing by R.C. Bray. Homefront, an Expeditionary Force audio drama special by Craig Allenson. Now stay tuned for the show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Hallie Ephron on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book called Careful What You Wish For, that is going to strike a nerve with a lot of people. And as we talk about it, I think you're going to know why. This book is one of the best psychological suspense books that I've read in quite a while, with a brand new, fresh take on the whole genre. Welcome to the show, Hallie.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for the kind words.
I'm excited to have you. The book is phenomenal. It's one of those that I just could not put down. But before we get into talking about all that good stuff, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, gosh. Actually, my first memories are of not wanting to be a writer. If I can subvert the question a bit, I come from a family of writers, and I was always the one who said, I don't write. I have 3 writing sisters, Nora, Delia, Hallie. I'm the third. No, Nora, Delia, Amy. I'm Hallie. And I was always the one who wanted to teach. And then I wanted to work in businesses and high tech. I did a lot of teaching in high tech and a lot of writing at the same time, but never making anything up. The whole idea of making something up terrified me. And also, I just didn't want to compete with my family. I just wanted to be in my own realm. And I was about 40 when I got a call from a freelance writer asking if she could write a piece about me. She said, because you're the only one who doesn't write.
Did that sting a little?
It did. I said, if anyone's going to write about me not writing, it's going to be me. And I started to take classes. It just pushed me to say, this is stupid. You have the talent. Go for it. So what if you fail, So I did.
Well, it's really interesting because, there's a discussion about whether storytellers, and we'll separate storytellers from writers for just a minute, because I think there are people that are phenomenal storytellers that may not pursue the art of writing. It's kind of one is an extension of the other, if you want to look at it that way. But are storytellers born or are they made? And do you feel like that you always had the air quotes writing gene all along, or was it just something that you needed a catalyst to pursue that path?
Well, I think knowing that everyone in my family was a writer meant I knew that I must have inherited something, and therefore I should be braver about taking the risk. It's a huge risk. It's a really steep learning curve. And I'm not a natural writer. There are people who, from the age 3, keep diaries. They write everything that worries them, everything that they need to think through. They don't talk about it. They write it. And I never did that. I'm just not I make lists. I check things off. That's it. So I think knowing I had the genes made a big difference to me. It gave me some courage to start. And also having had, a 20, 25-year career where I'd been saving my pennies gave me it takes a while before you actually see any income from it.
Sure. You said that you worked in high tech. What was what sort of field did you work in? I
have a PhD. I was busy before I started writing. I have a doctorate I have a master's in teaching and a doctorate in evaluation, educational measurement. And I taught at the college level, people who wanted to be teachers, and then I moved and started working at Digital Equipment Corporation. Remember, Dan?
DEC, yeah.
DEC, yeah. It was a great place to work. And I developed courses for them, for their employees, for their customers, and I moved from that into doing quality assurance in the education department, which involved designing tests and such like that. So I was a consultant, I was a trainer, I did all kinds of things. I managed a fairly large cost center. It was a wonderful place to work. I was always 2 years later I'd be doing something different than I'd been doing 2 years earlier, which was just so much fun.
Well, that seems like worlds away from what you do now and the types of stories that you tell. Was there always a love for mysteries and thrillers, suspense? Was that always bubbling underneath, or was that a genre or genres that you read for pleasure?
In retrospect, I guess I did. I read Nancy Drew, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, and but I wasn't. I guess, and as when I started, using my local library and buying my own books, I guess I powered through P.D. James and Dorothy Sayers and Niall Marsh, all the golden age. Although P.D. James is almost contemporary, although she's no longer with us. I just loved mystery novels, but I have to say I started writing them for a couple of reasons. One was my sisters hadn't written one, so I wasn't going to be compared. And the other thing is there's a structure to them. It's not like writing. I always think of writing a literary novel like you're wandering around in the desert looking for the answer, and there's no path. you're making your own path. Whereas in a mystery novel, there's a very clear set of expectations that readers have about how these things work out, how they get structured, how you create a page turner. And from my teaching background, I really understand the way things relate to one another. I know how to structure things. And so it really appealed to my logical brain to write a mystery, because it's got that sort of Rubik's Cube feeling where you look at it initially and it doesn't look like there's any sense to it, and then click, 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 all of a sudden it's a pattern.
Right. There's this feeling of competition that happens with young writers, especially. We feel like it's us against the world, and that people are going to have to make a decision between reading our book and reading another book on the shelf. And what we know is that most readers will read everything that they come in contact with and like. And rarely is it a choice between one or the other. It may be a different time, but we rarely compete with one another for readers' attentions. What we're really competing for against is YouTube and Facebook and Netflix and all of that stuff. You have a little different situation in that you come from a family of writers, and not only do you have the sense of competition, but sort of a sibling rivalry kind of thing. How did you get through that to be at the place where you are now?
Oh, sibling rivalry. I have to say I don't feel it particularly, in part because I chose to write mystery novels. I'm really, my sister Nora wrote, well, first of all, she didn't write a lot of books, and what she did write were essays, amazing essayist. And her one novel was a roman à clef, about her divorce. And then she went on to write romantic comedy screenplays. And my sister Delia has been all over the place in terms of fiction, nonfiction, humor really is what she's so remarkable at. And my sister Amy was historical, romantic, and now she's working on middle grade fantasy. And so I've managed to find a place for myself where I'm not in overt competition with them. I mean, I could have written under my married name, but I chose to write under my maiden name, Ephron, because there are fans. There are people who know the name, and so I wasn't going to walk away from that.
Right. It's good to find your own place, though, isn't it? It's
right. No, it absolutely is. Yeah.
So after having the challenge of someone who wanted to highlight you as the member of the family who did not write, and took that as a bit of a personal affront, what was the first project that you tackled to prove to yourself that this could be done?
I had a friend who had something very terrible happen in her family. Her brother was murdered, and she had worked with her brother, and she became housebound and terrified, really PTSD in the aftermath of it. And I met with her many times and captured, as she spoke about what had happened, captured her story. And that was my first attempt at writing, was to talk about what is the aftermath of a murder, what kind of havoc is wreaked, despite whether the killer, who in this case was arrested, went to jail for life. But that's not the end of the story, not for the loved ones left behind. So that was my first attempt, and I ended up not publishing it. I wasn't a good enough writer, first of all, but I could have gotten good enough if I'd worked at it for a couple more years. But I stopped because I felt it wasn't my story to tell. There was a widow, there were children, there was family, and it was heartbreaking. And I felt like it wouldn't be... I felt like a carrion crow feeding off other people's despair. And I didn't want a career that was like that. So I put it away. And the good thing is I learned a lot from it. I learned about pacing. I learned about creating a sense of place, about characters, dialogue, setting a scene. And it was a good launching pad for me. It was, we always call them training wheels books. That was my training wheels book. And from there, I moved to fiction, which I knew would be harder because you have to make it up. Gak. So my first books, I actually collaborated with with a man who is a forensic neuropsychologist, and we created a character who's a lot like him, called him Dr. Peter Zach, and we wrote 5 books for St. Martin's, mystery novels, and that was my launching pad.
Nice. What do you think that you learned from the collaboration that has helped you as a writer?
I think one of the reasons that I collaborated to start with was I thought I didn't have a story to tell. What had I done? I had gone to elementary school, college, graduate school. I'd worked in high tech. I'd worked in college. It's like boring life. What is there that I had to say? And I know that working with Don, his name is Don Davidoff, was a wonderful way to start because he has a really interesting life. I mean, he runs a unit at Harvard's McLean Hospital, the memory unit, and he just knows all kinds of really interesting things about people and how we think. And he also serves as an expert witness in murder trials and evaluates people accused of murder and other crimes. And writing with him was great because he had all kinds of stories to tell. But by the time I had finished the 5th book with him, I realized I had stories to tell too, and I didn't have to be a forensic neuropsychologist to tell them that what I had lived, being a mother, being a wife, living in the suburbs, that there's a lot of meat there to create compelling stories and stories that people will relate to.
When you start working on a new book and a new story is in that cogitation phase where it's things are coming together and it's the beginning of a story but not quite a story yet, what usually comes to you first? Is it a character? Is it a premise? Is it a setting? How does it usually begin for you?
I would say there's no pattern. The book before my newest, You'll Never Know, Dear, started with a friend who told me about having to clear out her mother's house so that her mother was moving into assisted living. It was a southern big house in the South, and under all the beds, she kept all the makings of dolls. She made dolls. She was a doll maker. And so my poor friend was pulling out box after box after box of doll parts. Heads, eyeballs, your arms, legs, bodies. Well, that's like right up my alley. I got real excited about that and decided I would write a book about a doll maker set in the South. And the doll parts would be pivotal to the solution of the book. And that's all I knew to start. And so I went down to Beaufort, where I set it, and wandered around, and pieces of it started to come together. The new book, Careful What You Wish For, is really a story I've been wanting to tell for a long time. I've been married for 100 years to a wonderful guy who is a collector. Let us use the word kindly. He likes to go to yard sales. Every Saturday, it's like Sherman's March. He's planning it. And often he comes home with stuff that goes right in the basement or the garage or the attic or the trunk of his car. And sometimes he brings home something wonderful. But he enjoys it. I've learned to live with it. But with the whole Marie Kondo thing coming so, she's the decluttering guru. who's teaching us all how to fold our socks. I thought, what if a professional organizer was married to a man who can't pass a yard sale without stopping? And that was the beginning of that book. So this is probably the most, in a weird way, the most personal book. I mean, my entire basement is in the book.
When
not my husband,
right.
but the basement is.
When you began this book, because the way the publishing industry works, when a book comes to market, it's probably been in the works for a couple of years by that point, from the planning and writing, then through revisions, editing, and all that. The Marie Kondo has really kind of come to our kind of pop culture consciousness really big in this last year. Was that bubbling to the surface when you began this book? It seems like you were a little ahead of the curve on that.
I was lucky. I was way ahead of the curve. I started this book 2.5 years ago, and she had published her first book, but she didn't have her TV show, and but I knew people who were. It's funny. I don't remember exactly how I became aware of her writing, but I did know about the Professional Organizers Organization, NAPO, I think it's called, and this whole business of helping people downsize. I mean, I was seeing a lot of people who trying to deal with getting rid of stuff and just the whole thing about hoarding. And I'm just very interested in people's relationship to their stuff. I've always been. So my first essay about my husband's collecting, I wrote, I think 25 years ago, was one of the first things I wrote. And pieces of it are in the book. So, yeah, this is, I would say, one of those fortunate confluences of, I'm very happy,
Yeah. It sounds like you had pieces of it that had just been waiting for the right time.
Exactly. And, one of the pieces of advice I give to writers is never throw anything away.
Oh,
because,
yes.
Today's crap is tomorrow's compost.
That's right. That's right. Just a new name, and it takes on all new meaning. One of the great things about suspense is that a really great suspense book allows us to step into the story and a lot of times see ourselves, or at least empathize with the character. We can get close enough to that character's plight that we share in their terror and suffering in some way. What is it about a good suspense book that makes us love those kind of stories so much?
I think because you're so engaged in them. It's the same thing with a mystery. I mean, and this novel, my new novel, really is as much of a mystery as a suspense novel. I think because you get to participate, because if it's written properly, the main character is as clueless as you are for a good long time. And so you get to ride along and try to piece things together. And if it works, then the reader gets it only instants before the main character does. And I think it all relies on bonding with that main character. There's a good piece by Lee Child in the New York Times about suspense. He says basically suspense is created when you ask a question and then don't answer it, which I think oversimplifies, but that's basically, that idea that you're reading to find the answer, which the reader cleverly poses and makes you care about. That's the hard part, is making the reader care about it.
Right. Well, in the new book, Careful What You Wish For, we meet Emily, who is a professional organizer, and like you alluded to earlier, she's married to a man who's a air quotes collector, and we begin to see how the relationship is breaking down because the disparate nature of their personalities is causing rifts and is causing distance between them. This is I think this is something a lot of people can can relate to, because we seem to fall into these camps of people that don't want to get rid of things or want to, continually add things, and then people that want to just throw everything out. As having a husband like you do that's a collector, and you are the opposite, was it easy to tap into these relationship things? Obviously, you've taken this to an extended level, in the book, but how much do you draw on your personal experiences in a relationship when you're working out characters?
Well, I draw more on the stuff, a lot of the things that the character in my book collects, my husband collects. So there's a lot of books in our house. I always say he has no filing system. He has only a piling system, it's everywhere. And prints, old maps, a lot of the things that he collects and things that he wishes he had are in the book. And I think also, if you're living with someone who can't throw anything away, sometimes you watch them and you feel rage. You just feel pure rage. I want that stuff out of my house. It's like, so that feeling I channel. I also think that I'm lucky. My husband is not a hoarder. He's, if you can make the case, he will get rid of it. But I think, yeah. It's something I relate to with him. But he's not a hoarder, and he doesn't go to yard sales and spend thousands of dollars on stuff that we can't afford. There are many ways that people can collect stuff that are a lot more toxic than what even the character in the book is doing. And in fact, there's two characters at least in the book who are collectors, and they're very different kind of collectors. Neither of them hoarders. I felt like hoarding was too. It's sad, hoarding, and as I understand it, psychologically, it's much more severe than just having too much stuff. And I just didn't want to go there. I felt, I always feel some sympathy for people who can't deal with what's so obvious to the rest of the world they need to deal with.
Well, when things become compulsions, that becomes a whole other thing.
Exactly. And then you need professional help, and I'm not.
Right.
I'm trying to write a book that's fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, as much as they say, oh, no.
What sort of resources or maybe people that you talked to that helped you to understand the mindsets of organizers and collectors? Did you look for outside resources and information that helped you get into those heads?
Well, I went to yes, I did. I got hooked into the National Association of Professional Organizers, NAPO, and I went to one of their meetings, and several of their members answered my questions and were just so helpful. One in particular, Kathy Vines, who's actually written a book called, what's it called? Hang on. I'm getting it. It's called The Clever Girl's Guide to Living with Less. Kathy, Vines. So, and she's going to do a few of my book events with me, which will be fun. Yeah. Yes, I wanted to talk to them about, because my character's a professional organizer, where how do you initiate your first meeting with a client? How do you approach them? What information do you gather? How do you price the job? How do you decide whether to take it or not take it? There's so much interesting stuff to me about how you actually do that business. And then because it's so personal what you're doing, how do you negotiate each step along the way with the person that you're working for? So they were enormously helpful in that. And I also, sort of in the process of going to a meeting realized how much things like shelving and furniture are completely related, and files. just all of the things that, and labeling tape, what is the paraphernalia of the business? And so that's stuff that I probably could have made up, but it's a lot easier to actually say to somebody, what do you take in with you when you go to start doing a job? Do you take your own cleaner? Do you take your own face mask? What about gloves? All of that stuff is what makes it feel real. But you don't want it to be wrong, because then all the professional organizers that you hope are going to read your book are going to say, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. So I really was careful to try to check things with people who knew.
When you're reading this book, something that kept coming to me is storage places and places where people collect things, and no one goes to those places. Seems like such a perfect place for diabolical things to happen. Did the reality of the possibilities, did that ever strike you as like, oh my gosh, we live in a world where things could be happening and most of us would just never know?
Yeah, well, storage facilities are really interesting places, and we have an enormous one in the town I live in, and I drive past it, a couple times a week, and I'm always sort of looking over there and thinking, you never see people coming and going. It's like, you're right. I think the door closes and people just walk away from their stuff. But I always remember the scene, I'm sure you remember, in Silence of the Lambs. Do you remember what happens in the story?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So I always warn people there's no severed head in my book. I don't do severed heads. I don't write icky. I really don't. And having said that, the storage unit is important. In this case, it belongs to the husband, the deceased husband of a woman who, he's been dead for a year, and she just found the key to the storage unit that she didn't know exists. And she hires Emily to go open this in it. And it's downhill from there.
I'm glad you mentioned Silence of the Lambs, and you said a few minutes ago that that you wanted the book to be fun, and you used the word fun. There's a line in suspense and in mystery where things can go very, very wrong, and we can read things or see things, and we're scarred for life. And Silence of the Lambs is one of those for me. But there's a line where you can play with people's fears and the things that they fear and insecurities without going to a graphic extreme. How do you balance those things and writing a book that deals with these things that we're scared of, yet allows us to enjoy the experience and have fun with it?
Yeah, I call it the line between creepy and icky.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great metaphor.
I don't write icky. I don't like to read icky. I turn off the TV when it gets icky. On the other hand, I really like creepy. So, I mean, it's all about, where do you pull the curtains? Where do you, if you have a murder, and these books have murders in them, are you going to show it happening, or are you going to pull back the camera? And I'd always try to pull back, and I try never to imperil children in my books, because I simply, with children of my own, I can't bear reading about it. So I really try not to hurt kids. I try not to hurt pets, animals, and it's not hard to stay on the other side of that, but still be very creepy, and so, I mean, dolls are a good example of something that people find extremely creepy.
Right.
Particularly doll heads, or doll, or voice boxes, or all the disembodied parts. You don't have to go to real body parts, I guess. to be scary.
Well, I absolutely love what you're doing. I'm a big fan of your writing. Careful what you wish for. When people are hearing this, the book will be on sale, available everywhere in every format, audiobook, Kindle, and even in paper. Hallie, this has been so much fun chatting with you. If people are just learning about you and want to dig into your back catalog and follow along for news coming up, is there a place that they can connect with you online?
Thanks, Hank. Yes, there are two places. One is my website, which is HallieEphron.com, HallieEphron.com. In fact, I just have a brand new website up. And the other place is I blog every day. I'm there to some extent on Jungle Red Writers. So that's one word, Jungle Red Writers, with 6 other fabulous mystery writers. We're always talking about all kinds of stuff. And so either of those places will... Oh, and on my website, if you want my newsletter, just click on it and send me your email. And I promise I don't send very many newsletters. You will not be inundated.
Well, we will send everyone to see you and to pick up their copy of Careful What You Wish For. If you're a mystery suspense lover like I am, this is going to need to have a space on your shelf. Hallie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you. This has been delightful. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. Be sure to subscribe at hankgarner.com or on your favorite podcasting app. Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I'm melting, cried Joey. Take the picture already. He stood with one arm around the bronze waist of the bewitched tribute statue, Samantha Stevens, riding a broom across a crescent moon. Jason tried in vain to frame the shot without any tourists in it, but that was impossible. From all points of the compass, a merry horde had arrived for Salem's 2-day summer psychic fair. All the commuter trains had burst open, like cornucopias filled beyond capacity, spilling endless fruits and nuts onto the red brick sidewalks of Essex Street. A vampiress in lavender shorts and feathered boots sold maple chocolate walnut fudge in front of the Witch City tattoo parlor. A near-naked gypsy in purple-green veils danced with a pheasant in her arms around a plug-in Hanukkah menorah. A fat man in a fetching blue jeans dress sold amethyst and citrine charm bracelets in front of Medusa Cafe, but his stand got knocked over by a one-armed crone driving a mobility scooter who sang "Choo-choo" as she passed, her stump on the wheel, her lipstick ghastly, her gnarled right hand raised in trailing plumes of noxious cigarette smoke. Chewbacca leapt out of her way and slapped sparks from his fur. He gave a disgruntled growl before going back to playing Summer Lovin' on his ukulele. The old one-armed dervish drove off, "Choo-choo," parting a crowd of wanderers, slack-jawed tourists with camera straps tight across their bellies, yellow-vested police on segways, elderly rollerbladers, face-painted infants and harried parents, and college girls. So many hot, hysterical college girls that you'd think somebody had napalmed a sorority house. "Jason, are you deaf?" "Sorry." Jason raised the phone and took the shot. Joey inspected the photo and nodded in approval. "Your turn." "No, thanks." "Do it, Shaggy. Don't make me hex you." Jason gave in and traded places. He put an arm around Samantha's metal back. Her bronze body had flushed in the afternoon sun, warm through his glove, but her eyes were weary. No, downright creepy. And her smile was forced, like a Disneyland princess who'd had her toe stomped. "Say chowder," cried Joey, who'd been practicing his New England accent all morning. "Come on, man. Say chowder." "Fine, chowder." Joey got the shot, and Jason surrendered Samantha to a chubby kid wearing a Gandalf beard who climbed up to worship her bronze bosom.